Hello and welcome to the monthly Central U.S. Climate Outlook. My name is John Ives with the National Weather Service here at Central Region Headquarters in Kansas City. I will be today's moderator. Before we begin our introduction, I just want to let everyone know that we have muted the call. And when we get to the end, we'll take questions. And at that time, we will allow everybody to one at a time ask questions. That keeps the line nice and clear for all of us to hear. Our speaker today is Dr. Dennis Toddy, and he is with the South Dakota State University. He is the state climatologist there. And we will go ahead and turn it over to Dennis.
Thank you very much, John. We're not quite as conceited as the Ohio State University, but thank you for introducing us that way. So great to be here today. Hope everyone is enjoying their day. If you're in the Northern Plains today, you are experiencing the wonders of the plains. The image you see before you does not exist currently. If it had been here, the leaves on there would now be somewhere near Jim Angel in Illinois, with wind gusts here somewhat less than yesterday, but still into the 40s to near 50 in places. Had wind gusts near 80 miles per hour yesterday in Wyoming. So it is a very strong wind day in the Northern Plains. Just a reminder, we'd like to welcome this to you. We'll talk about our current climate impacts and what is going to be coming up based on the outlooks we're seeing. Just a reminder, this is a collaboration, a very strong collaboration among a number of different entities, regional climate centers, state climatologists, NOAA, and NDMC, USDA, even other NOAA entities with some of the Great Lakes information we'll present today. So it's been a very enjoyable week working on this, gathering information from a number of different folks. The next webinar is a month from now. We will have Dr. Jeff Andreessen from Michigan State, the Michigan State climatologist, will be presenting. And also a reminder that these are recorded and available for review later on, so please pass them on to people who are not able to attend. So our agenda today is looking at some of the current conditions, where we are right now, some of the impacts related to what's happened this fall. It's been a very interesting fall from a record standpoint and an impact standpoint. And then we'll touch on some of the outlook information. Obviously, El Nino, a big player with where we are right now, what that means for the rest of winter, and what we can say about next spring and summer. And this photo was valid as of the 15th thanks to Natalie Umflett from HPRCC, some of the impact we're having because of the warm fall. So review and some of our current conditions. Look back at the month of October from a temperature standpoint statewide across the country. You can see the numbers, the ranking for the number ranking for each state across the U.S. We do have 121 years of data involved here. So you can see the scale across the bottom. The pinkish color are states that were above average, and then as you get further into the red, we're into the much above average and record warmest, the state of Washington outside of our area for today. But you can see most of the states in the Plains and Midwest were above average for October, and you can see some of the ones further west reaching that top 2 or 3 category for the month of October. Was a big driver, and we'll talk more about that as we go along here. From a precipitation side, much more of a mixed bag. You can see on the scale of Illinois and Missouri, contrasting to where they started the year with it being very wet. They came in quite dry in the month of October, coming in 20th and 21st respectively. Lots of green across the southern U.S., part of Colorado, and then near the Ohio Valley, Tennessee, and Kentucky coming in 90th and 89th. So looking at a bit more El Nino-like here with the subtropical jet, the jet across the southern U.S. being more active, and the northern U.S. being less active. Not too dry overall, but somewhat drier comparatively. We'll step back into the 90-day period, looking back, so we're going August through October here for comparison. You can see that the signal that we saw in temperature stands out even more strongly. That period ranked quite high, top 10, or in the case of Wyoming and Colorado, the warmest August to October on record, and many of the other states coming in the much above warmer than average category had impacts on the growing season and what we're seeing in the way of gardens and that sort of thing we'll talk about here in a little bit. From a precipitation standpoint, a much more of a mixed bag, and you see that area in the southern part of the central U.S. from Indiana down towards Missouri and Kansas coming in on the relatively dry. Again, in contrast to where they started the year with being quite wet, they ended up the year, the growing season, we'll say, on the dry side. South Dakota, Iowa, and Wisconsin came in on an above-average standpoint during that period. But they were very location-specific. So we'll touch on some of those locations as we go along through the slides here. Stepping ahead now and catching the most recent 30 and 90-day precipitation, and we're looking at percent of normal precipitation last 30 days in the upper left-hand side and the last 90 days in the upper right-hand side, gives us I want to show some perspective on the real mixed message that we see across the region. See, the last 30 days, the lots of blues and purples indicating much wetter than average for our last 30-day period over a good portion of the region, except for part of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wyoming into Montana. But this is the drier part of that 90-day period. So if you look at the last 90 days, the areas still show up as wet from South Dakota, say, Nebraska into Minnesota and Iowa, but parts of the Dakotas into Wyoming and then parts of the main part of the Corn Belt still are showing up drier than average, as much as 50% of average over the last 90-day period. So some recent rainfall has been a real help in some of those areas. So putting this in the context of the U.S. Drought Monitor, where we are, just released this morning, we have a spotty picture all across the central part of the U.S. Lots of spots of yellow D0 areas with pockets of D1 moderate drought from North Dakota and Minnesota into southeastern Minnesota, into Michigan and Indiana, and even parts of Kansas. Little pockets that are dry, with that dry area that set in as the year went along, has left them with some moderate drought conditions as we're going into the cold season here. And again, the western U.S. still some recovery there because of additional precipitation, but some ongoing major drought issues. So let's look at some of the impacts that we've had because of the conditions this fall. A little bit of a busy map here, but some really good information. Looking at the late hard freeze, we consider a freezing condition is 32 degrees, a hard freeze at 28, because at about that temperature, most crops and garden plants will succumb to freezing conditions. But not only have we been late in some of our freezes this year, we've been record-setting late in some cases. Special thanks to Zoe at the Midwest Regional Climate Center. What's plotted out here are the dots are locations that were the top 5 latest in their first hard freeze. And so the number on the left-hand side is the ranking. So the reds are the ones, say here in Lemon, South Dakota. It was the latest hard freeze. The more magenta is getting into the second latest, third latest, and then on down to the 5th. And then the right-hand side is the number of years in the record. So we want to look at longer periods of record. So you see a number of stations all across our region came in as the top 5 latest hard freezes. And in some cases, we had just barely reached that, or in some cases not reached that level just yet. These dots are places that had not reached that level yet. The open dots were not near record. They were probably well towards the later end, but not in that top 5. So very impressive how late that first freeze has been so far this fall. What that's done for us from an impact standpoint, obviously extended the growing season. Most row crops, had dried out long before this, allowed freezing time. But from a garden standpoint, flowers, trees really allowed them to continue growing into the fall if there was moisture available. Shown you some images along the way of flowers growing well into November that we would not expect this time of year. Trees had leaves on them late into the year. And in some places, we still have gardens growing. As of a couple weeks ago, a reporter I work with here in South Dakota who indicated she still had tomatoes and peppers growing in central South Dakota much later than you would expect. So it's really extended the growing season. Has been a problem in killing off all the insects. Obviously less insect activity, but there's been some delay in killing them off. As we look in some places where we have more heavy horticultural areas, especially Michigan, Jeff Andreessen mentioned, there could be some potential because of this late activity where if they were to turn very cold, which is fairly unlikely, we are turning colder now, but fairly unlikely to turn as extreme cold because of the warm lake levels there, should not be a problem. From a tree standpoint, there was some concern with the number of trees that still had leaves on them, with some of the winter storms, especially in Colorado, that we could see more damage because of heavy snow accumulations on trees with leaves. Also getting late first snows, kind of a little bit of a couple things to talk about here. This just came out this week from Deke Arndt at the National Center for Environmental Information, part of NOAA, a map of the historic date of the first measurable snow. The areas here are ones that would occur in September. The little bit darker blue are the average date is during the month of October. A little bit darker blue is the average date in November, and then the purplish down here out of our area for the most part is that average first snow is in December. So you can see that much of our area here from Montana into South Dakota would have their average first snow, well by this point. But you can see this accumulated snowfall map from the Midwest Regional Climate Center. We've not had snow and measurable snow in some of these areas already, so well later than average. In fact, from a South Dakota standpoint, we came close to setting an interesting record. 4 years previously, we've had nothing but trace amounts during the month of October. All other years, we've had measurable snow during the month of October. This year, we were 4 days short of getting through the month without any snowfall reported whatsoever. We ended up being a fifth year of having an October with just trace amounts and no measurable snowfall amounts during the month of October. So late getting the snow season started here. From an agriculture standpoint, there have been some very good impacts. Generally, it's been an easy harvest season with crops drying down appropriately. No big storm events, snow events, and not very much wetness to deal with. People have been able to harvest as appropriate and as they were able to. I even talked to a farm manager here from one of the SDSU farms that they had some equipment problems. But with the long fall, they've had ample time to take care of equipment problems and get crops out. We've set yields in several states. We'll show you here in just a little bit. Dry conditions allowed crops to dry in the field very well. In some cases, crops were a little bit too dry, and they had to wait until there was some moisture back in them in cases. For those not in the ag area, there's an appropriate amount of probably around 15% moisture that is wanted in crops, especially for corn. If you're above that, you have to dry it, and you have to pay for propane or drying cost, or you get docked when you take it to the elevator, so you want to be as close to that as you can, especially this year with low commodity prices. They didn't want to expend additional drying cost. If it's too dry, you actually lose some volume in those seeds, and then there's some loss from that standpoint. So there's kind of a sweet spot you want to try to hit. And this year there was not a lot of additional drying that was necessary. From a winter wheat standpoint, what I'm hearing across the area where we do winter wheat establishment, there's been enough moisture for that to get established well, a sufficient moisture and growth, and actually in some cases it's been warm enough. They've been concerned about too much growth, that you can get too much growth in winter wheat before it goes dormant in the winter. It doesn't appear to be the case just at this point, but it is something that's on a few people's minds. Also, this late season precipitation we've had, this is precipitation totals over the last 2 weeks. You can see over chunks of the Corn Belt area, we've had a half-inch amounts, some heavier amounts, again, from Iowa on up towards Lake Superior. And into southern Missouri, Jim Angel and Pat Gannon from Illinois and Missouri indicated that did alleviate some concerns about dry soils going into the fall. Probably not resolve the dryness completely, but some additional moisture did help them out. It did leave us with several records for November precipitation, obviously many daily records, but also ranking high on the scale of daily records for the whole month. Some locations, pushing 2 inches in parts of the Dakotas. That's, for this time of year, that's a very large precipitation amount, ranking high on the November precipitation totals for individual days. Mentioned earlier about some record yields being set. Borrowed these from USDA, indicating the statewide average corn yields as of November 1. What's shown here is in the blue are states where they revised the number upward from the previous month, and then the number on the top is the average corn yield for that state. The reddish states are ones where they were revised downward from the previous month, and then the grays were no change. But particularly want to point out the hash marks are states that had record corn yield, bushel per acre, so this is per acre average, not total amount of corn produced. So you can see that South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, and Wisconsin, also Kentucky came in, and Michigan had their record corn yields, bushels per acre, for their states. From a soybean standpoint, the colors are all still the same, lots of revised upwards, several no changes. But again, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois this time, Arkansas, and Kentucky all came in at record soybean yields for this year. So some very good growing conditions throughout the year. Kind of a busy map here, but a combined map of soil temperatures across the region. Here is from the High Plains Regional Climate Center. Temperatures, foreign soil temperatures ranging from near the 50s, still quite warm around the Central Plains area, down to the mid-30s, into the western Dakotas and into Wyoming. Still a bit warm for this time of year. We're starting to get close to freezing on an average basis. And then from the Midwest Regional Climate Center, number of states, state mesonet data here, the scale on the top. So greens are, around still in the 50s here, and then, again, those 30s and 40s up in North Dakota, still a ways away from freezing. The impact of this particularly is for people who are doing fall nitrogen applications. Not as always recommended, but still a fairly common occurrence. The warm and dry air temperatures kept soils very warm into the fall, and if people were not watching soil temperatures, they might have been applying nitrogen as they, by a calendar date, second week or third week of October, we're usually doing this sort of thing. And the problem is if you're applying nitrogen and soil temperatures are above 50 degrees, you're going to start losing some of that nitrogen applied. So that probably is going to be the case in some cases this year, and talking to some folks have indicated that, people were just going ahead and doing it and trying to remind them they had plenty of time, had to wait for soil temperatures to go down, and they're really were not going to be freezing, so it's not going to be much of an issue. We have had a few fire issues with the dryness, especially in other parts of the Corn Belt. In the Plains area, that is a semi-common occurrence during the fall, but this was from Iowa. Ray Wolf at the National Weather Service near Davenport, pictures he took near his area of a harvested field and a fire getting started on one of these days. So we did have some fire issues going in these locations. Looking from a stream flow perspective, last 7 days as of yesterday, areas that are in green are middle of the distribution of stream flow, so lots of green throughout the area. Some areas of blue and even black, which are on the high end because of some of the rainfall we've had recently, especially western Iowa, parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin on the high end, even around the Black Hills because of some of the recent precipitation. Do have a few pockets of dry showing up in some of the stream flows in the eastern Corn Belt, parts of Kansas, Nebraska, and a little bit out here in the Montana-Wyoming area in the headwaters of the Missouri River. So some of the dryness showing up there. Some comments are received from the regional forecast centers, tossing some numbers around about 5 to 10% below average, saying that that's that much reduced probability of having bank-full conditions when we come around to spring, particularly in the Missouri and Mississippi systems. I hope I'm interpreting those numbers correctly. basically not saying very dry, but on the dry side. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers numbers were indicating inflows to Fort Peck and Garrison as 60 to 85% of average in recent months, and that included some of their forecast projections for the month of November and December. So dry areas up in the upper basin is leading to lower than average inflows. They are fully aware of the potential for El Nino, and we're watching that with them very closely. From a Great Lakes standpoint, to include some information about the Great Lakes borrowed from the GLESA there, a couple images showing water level projections. These maps are from, you can see U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, months along the bottom from 2013 until the present, and then projections based on a couple different scenarios. The dotted line here is the longer-term average in both of these cases, and the black line is where we are currently. So Lake Superior running somewhat above average, as is the Lake Michigan-Huron area. And then the projections here take a couple different looks. The blue line is projected based on, we're going to talk about El Nino more, the 82-83 El Nino event. The red line is the 97-98 El Nino event, and what those would superimpose what the current conditions would look like. The projections right now are in this hatched area, this reddish area, which says more than likely both of them are going to stay above average, above the long-term average. Both of them have a small percentage chance of falling below, but likely still to stay above the long-term average as we're looking into next year. I mentioned earlier about the Great Lakes water temperatures. You see still relatively warm water from 50 degrees to upper 40s, and Superior in the mid-40s. Still fairly warm for this time of year, so that's going to protect the areas around them from too much of the cold as we get into some of the cold areas here. Okay, let's talk a bit about El Nino. We've alluded to that before. Still a big player going on right now. We have very officially from the NOAA side, the ENSO alert system, we are in an advisory because of ongoing El Nino conditions. Very strong El Nino conditions. There's a number of different ways you can slice this and look at whether it's the biggest on record or not. Certainly, it would come in the category of the top 2 or 3, depending on how you want to look at it, going on right now. The upper left-hand corner, the sea surface temperature and their anomaly over about the last couple months, still much warmer than average conditions throughout the equatorial Pacific, indicating stronger El Nino. On the lower right-hand side, the level, the change or the anomaly compared to depth. So from the right-hand side is South America, the left-hand side is Australia. So you see maybe a little bit of lessening of some of the depth of the water there, of some of the anomalies, but still hanging on very strong. So it's going to continue to be a major player throughout the winter. The projections of what's going to happen with El Nino from IRI at Columbia, the red line indicates the probability of being in an El Nino for the 3-month periods going out to the summer from where we are right now, October, November, December, going on out into June, July, and August. And each of these 3 bars for the 3-month periods, if you add them up, it comes to 100%. So you can see as we go along through the late summer and late winter into spring, the chances of El Nino begin to weaken pretty sharply as we get from the late winter to springtime. March, April, May has about a 75% chance of being an El Nino, with neutral becoming a more likely candidate as we get to late spring and summer. And you can even see that by summer, we have about a 25% chance of being in a La Nina. But by summer, you also see these solid lines are the climatological averages. So you see that the bars are close to climatological averages by summer. So the indications are that we don't have much skill beyond that point. But El Nino is strong, it's going to impact us right now, and going to continue to weaken as we go along here. So from an El Nino standpoint, we're currently in an El Nino, and it will impact us this winter. It's going to be weakening late and probably weakening fairly rapidly through the spring. This was somewhat expected, as this seems to be the case for these very strong El Ninos. When they do weaken, they weaken pretty rapidly. I mentioned chance of La Nina by summertime. That will slightly increase our drought risk during the summer to back more near climatological probabilities of drought rather than any specific leaning one way or the other. In fact, there's a chance of reflected in the next winter outlook of La Nina occurring with very small probabilities looking at next winter if you look to the Climate Prediction Center outlooks for next winter. So looking through the outlooks now, we have the 7-day, the whole series, 7-day precipitation outlook into winter, and then we'll even look a little bit out towards what might be happening towards spring and summer. So next 7 days from outlook from NOAA, basically what are the likely potential precipitation amounts. You can see across the northern part of the Corn Belt, chances of potential for an inch or maybe a little bit more precipitation with the system that is going to be coming through, dropping some snow, and there are some advisories based on that right now, and some heavier precipitation amounts in the southeast, and in the northwest, in the upper part of the Missouri Basin, projections for decent amounts of precipitation. Though some of this, unfortunately, may be falling as rain, possibly falling as rain, which doesn't stick around as well as we would like with snow. The 8 to 14-day outlook shows a bit of a change from what we have been seeing here recently. On the left-hand side, you can see about the eastern, little more than half of the U.S. has a pretty good probability of being below average in the way of temperatures for the end of November, with some additional chances for precipitation. It looks like there's maybe a couple systems coming around the Thanksgiving time that might muck with people's travel plans, and the TV meteorologists will be having fun with those. But this is a bit of a change, looking for, compared to what we've had throughout most of the fall. Not unexpected that we'd have some of this. We'll probably return to some warmer than average temperatures, assuming El Nino behaves itself as we look beyond this time frame. December overall, just released today, the new December outlooks does show a very El Nino looking like pattern with high probabilities of above average temperatures throughout the northern U.S. And very limited probabilities of below average down the southern U.S., a very El Nino looking like result here. A little bit of change, increased the area a bit that is considered likely drier than average throughout the northern U.S., basically from Montana over to the Great Lakes area. Again, these probabilities are small, but they do lean towards the dry side. A little bit stronger probability for the dry in the upper Missouri Basin there. And the southern part of our area could actually get into that subtropical jet that gets more active during El Ninos and get a little bit more, has better chances for precipitation during the month of December. The 3-month outlook for December through February, again, looks very similar to what we've been showing here, but with a bit stronger probabilities even. Looking on the temperature side, you see some of those red areas. That is in the 60% probability category. If we interpret this directly, basically saying that around the Great Lakes they have a 60% chance, according to the Climate Prediction Center, of being in the above average temperature category. There'd be about a 30% chance of being in the near normal temperature category, and only about a 7% chance of being below average temperature. So very strongly leaning towards the warm side up here. On the precipitation side, these are about as strong as you get on the precipitation side too, with a 50 probability in the upper Missouri, far upper Missouri headwaters area, 50% probability of falling into the below average chances for precipitation, also around the Great Lakes, and then that northern plains area. A pretty sharp contrast to the central plains where we have fairly decent chances for above average chances for precipitation. Again, very El Nino looking. The central plains can get into that more active period of precipitation. But then if we skip ahead on the Climate Prediction Center outlooks and look at the April through June period, you see a breakdown in this pattern that the temperature chances over most of our region are EC to equal chances for below or above average, except for our eastern areas and around the Great Lakes, which they hang on to a little bit on the warm side. From a precipitation side, the Rockies and western plains have an above average chance for precipitation come spring, with the continuation of that dry area in the Great Lakes and part of the Ohio River. I don't think there's a real strong confidence in this precipitation area in the April through June time frame, but some of the models do show that area showing up there. So worth keeping an eye on. If we combine these into the drought outlook on what's going on, what is projected through the rest of our climatological winter through the end of February, the areas that are in the kind of darkish green here, I need my daughter to teach me my colors again, showing drought removal likely. I think they're banking on some of this earlier winter precipitation occurring for removal in these areas. The darker areas here are drought persisting, basically not as much chance for precipitation and actually falling into the category, the drier area likely up here. So with low climatologies, it's likely going to persist anyway. Drought likely to persist in the upper Missouri Basin, and the yellow area projections, because of the higher likelihood of being dry, that the drought development is very possible into Wyoming, Montana. So that's something we can continue to keep an eye on as we're looking throughout the winter. And we're also going to be looking for local input from people in those areas as to what are the current situations. So kind of a summary of where we are right now. We've had a mostly warm fall with various impacts we've talked about. Fairly dry over most of the region with pockets of wet. It's been a good harvest season. Yields very good overall. Winter wheat's in good shape. And then the late freeze, the impact of that late freeze we've talked about. From an outlook standpoint, we are considered in an El Nino advisory. This is going to continue to impact the winter outlook very heavily, very much El Nino looking. During an El Nino, the subtropical jet that goes across southern U.S. tends to be more active, and the polar jet, which is on the boundary of the coldest air, tends to stay further north. That's why we tend not to be as cool during those times. So we'll look for those to go on. Warmer than average is quite likely, especially across the northern areas. The closer you get to the Canadian border, most likely. We have some wetter possible area in the Central Plains as we go along through the winter time. Likely drier, pretty good significance of drier in the Northern Plains and Missouri headwaters, and then in the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley. As we get to late winter and spring, what's actually going to happen at that point becomes a bit more conjecture-ish, because as the El Nino breaks down, we'll have to watch how quickly the El Nino breaks down. And climatologically, that's our time of year for some bigger snowfall events in the plains anyway. And then summer, from the summer outlook, really it's kind of wide open. There's been some private industry discussion about potential for El Nino. Transition to El Nino by the end of summer is possible, but it's fairly unlikely because it's a fairly quick transition. We'd be more watching for the potential for transition to La Nina as we get into the fall and potentially next winter that would have an impact on our next winter. So just a reminder of who our partners are and their various websites where you can contact them. And thank you all for being here, and we'd love to have a conversation with some more questions.
Well, thank you, Dennis. And everyone, if you'd like to ask a question, you will have to press *6 on your phone to unmute your line. And then when you're finished with your question, please use *6 again to mute your line to keep the line clear. Also, before you ask your question, if you could please let us know your name and who you are with. Joining Dennis today is Doug Cluck from NOAA, and also we have Jim Angel, who is the Illinois state climatologist. So let's go ahead with our first question. Just use *6 to unmute.
Hello, Dennis. This is Bryce Anderson from DTN in Omaha. Very good discussion, Dennis. I had a couple things regarding the outlook I wanted to see if I could get your thoughts on. First of all, it looks like there is a little bit of a change in the upper air pattern, with some pretty strong high pressure now showing up over western Canada next week. That's going to kind of get in the way of some of this Pacific flow. I wanted to ask if that's possibly going to cause actually a little bit of a wrinkle in the El Nino pattern. And then there have been times, 1987 into 88 was one, 1997 into 98 was another one, where El Nino did reverse into La Nina by the following summer, with different impacts on crops. 88 was tough. 98 wasn't bad at all. Could I get your comments on those two topics, please?
Yeah, the 86 or the 87 El Nino was not as strong an El Nino. There was a quick transition out of it. The one I would point to was 82, 83, where we had a similarly strong El Nino, but we did transition into, I'm not sure if we were exactly in La Nina conditions by the end of summer, but that was across a chunk of the Corn Belt a very, very odd summer, and that we were very wet early and very dry late. So we're not saying the potential is not there for problems. I just don't think there's the potential problems are any more than climatological potentials. Without having an El Nino, we have various climatological potentials for drought and those sorts of things. So what's happening in the way of your first question, what's happening in the way of Canada? Sure, this does throw a temporary wrinkle into it. We'll have to see how long lasting it is. Some fairly cold temperatures, not too unseasonably cold for this time of year, but different, certainly different from where we've been right now. We certainly do expect periods during the winter time where other issues come into play, other oscillations come into play. So we'll just have to see how long lasting that is. It looks like we could certainly have a couple weeks of colder temperatures, but we'll have to see how long lasting that really holds into.
Yeah, the reason I wanted to get your thoughts on that was because if there's that blocking high that sets up in the far north, well then that would that would kind of force its way into the pattern throughout the winter. Then would it not?
It could. It depends on how long that high blocks in. The other part of you see is, I didn't dive into this too much. So there is that split flow that we like to see, or we often see during El Nino winters, and that can give us a mixed bag of things. Sometimes it can be very stagnant. I remember one El Nino winter where we had, in central Iowa, we had about 2 weeks straight of cloud cover, low cloud cover, because we were in split flow and we couldn't get any air movement through there to break out of the cloud cover. So, it is possible. There are small probabilities that this El Nino does not behave itself. I'm trusting the NOAA scientists on this one that it will behave itself through the winter here.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Sure.
This is Doug. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Doug.
I guess I don't have any too many more comments to make other than to say things like what we call the Madden-Julian oscillation often temporarily throw rocks into the pond and create a few waves, if you will, in terms of how the El Nino pattern shows up across the U.S. and North America. So a great example, perhaps, is this big cold, if you will, cold temperature event across the West over the next couple of weeks. That is sort of the result or downstream effect of one of those perturbations, we like to say, but I'd say waves that are caused by events along the equator.
So Doug and Dennis, this is Diane.
Hi, Diane.
Hey, I got a question, and this is just one. Just kind of looking at where that El Nino, where the real warm stuff is, it seems to be just staying on the equator. Is that what keeps it, kind of the moisture and everything running further south than coming north and keeping the warmth up north?
Along the equator is the place where the warmer than average water tends to accumulate or tends to occur during an El Nino event. And then what that does is, because you're putting warmer water in different places in the ocean, that has an impact on the atmosphere, and then how the atmosphere then reacts. And why the southern U.S. gets a bit more of that impact is because there's enough heat, and it strengthens the subtropical jet, so that the jet that moves across the southern U.S. tends to be more active during these winter. And then why things don't always behave themselves is the northern jet. There's a couple other steps that has to go through. But no, that warm area along the equator, that's where we expect to see the El Nino. And especially, it's been known, actually we've known about El Ninos for several hundred years off the coast of South America. It's only been the last 30 years we've put together that it has impacts across the globe.
Okay. And I won't even ask about the wind because this is just ridiculous today. But
I tell people who are in South Dakota, if you're going to complain about the wind, how long have you lived in South Dakota? It's,
right.
It's the way it is. The way it is.
Well, thank you, Diane.
Hi, this is Ben Diamond of Toa Reinsurance.
Hey, Ben.
And my question is, what impact would El Nino have on the winter wheat?
It's a very interesting question on winter wheat, and here's why. If we would expect warmer conditions overall, then winter wheat doesn't like cold, especially in the northern plains, unless it has some snow on it. Now, if you're warmer overall, maybe you don't have quite the freeze impact. But if you're warmer overall, you also likely have snow sitting on the wheat when the cold periods do come, and we will get cold periods through the winter. That's still going to happen. The other part is if we're warm enough, you could get early dormancy break in the winter wheat because of the overall warm temperatures later in the season. And at a time before it should be breaking dormancy, and you could still get some frost damage. So it's hard to quantify. I think we're going to have some problems with winter kill or freeze damage on winter wheat. It's just really hard to say about how much damage there's going to be because of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, good question, Ben. I didn't talk about that more about some of the potential impact.
Further south, Dennis, I would assume that with the wetter, the probabilities of weather, the normal conditions from Kansas south, that part of the wheat crop, I don't know, looks to be better. But I've not done any studies, and I wouldn't know what the relationship to El Nino is.
Yeah, I mean, winter wheat basically is fairly dormant, so the overall impact further south probably should be potential benefit because you probably wouldn't get as much cold down there, so less potential for damage. And then if you are wetter than we would expect to be, that would be good for when it breaks dormancy, having moisture to work with. But also the same thing, I've not looked at this in great detail specifically.
This is Mary from Kansas. Hello?
Hi, Mary.
Yeah. One of the problems that you can get in Kansas during that it will be how that spring plays out, because if we've got a moderate winter, a mild winter, and even normal dormancy break, but then we get into a cold spring, then you've got the possibility for that freeze damage when the wheat's out ahead of itself. Otherwise, an El Nino winter is generally favorable. The second problem that they'll be watching for is excessively wet conditions in the spring can fuel foliar disease issues.
Yep, right. Which we saw some of this past year after we had the dryness impact, then we turned very wet, and what did survive the dryness, then we added disease to. So. Thanks, Mary. Any other questions?
Well, thank you
We sure
again. Yeah, well, thank you again, Dennis and Doug and Jim for being here today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for the monthly Central U.S. Climate Outlook. We would like to extend an invitation for you to join us again next month. And we going to be pushing towards Christmas by that time, and that'll be on December 17th at the same time, 1 p.m. Central. Take care, everyone, and have a happy Thanksgiving and safe travels.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.